Jacob lived for the unknown. He craved adventure. From a young age, he was drawn to the mysteries that the world had to offer, always seeking the thrill of the unexplored. He sought out the world's hidden corners, places steeped in mystery and folklore. These were the places where legends were born, and Jacob wanted to be a part of those stories. He had traveled from the icy plains of Siberia to the bustling souks of Morocco. Each journey added a new chapter to his life, filled with unique experiences and unforgettable encounters. Yet nothing could have prepared him for the secluded village of Morovia. It was unlike any place he had ever seen, a place where time seemed to stand still. Nestled deep within the Carpathian Mountains, Morovia was a place untouched by time. The village was enveloped in a perpetual mist, giving it an ethereal quality. Its wooden houses seemed to sag under the weight of age. Each structure told a story of generations that had lived and died within its walls. The cobblestone streets whispered tales of a forgotten past. Every stone seemed to hold a secret, a piece of history waiting to be uncovered. The villagers, weathered and wary, spoke in hushed tones. Their eyes held stories of their own, filled with caution and a deep-seated fear. They eyed Jacob with suspicion, their gazes filled with a mixture of fear and warning. It was clear that outsiders were not common in Morovia. Despite the villagers' unsettling demeanor, Jacob was intrigued. He felt a magnetic pull towards the unknown, a desire to uncover the secrets that lay hidden in this enigmatic place. He could sense an undercurrent of fear. It was palpable, the air was thick with it, almost suffocating in its intensity. It clung to the very air he breathed. Every breath he took was filled with the weight of the villagers' unspoken fears. He soon discovered the source of their apprehension, the ancient forest that bordered the village. This forest was no ordinary woodland, it was a place of legend and dread, a place shrouded in shadow and whispered to be the dwelling place of creatures beyond imagination. The villagers spoke of these beings in hushed tones, their voices trembling with fear. Jacob stood at the edge of the forest, contemplating his next move. He knew that entering the forest would be dangerous, but his curiosity was too strong to resist. The call of the unknown was too powerful to ignore. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the forest, determined to uncover its secrets. The adventure of a lifetime awaited him, and Jacob was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The forest was an imposing presence, a dark and brooding entity. Locals spoke of it with a reverence born of terror. They called it the Devil's Playground. They warned Jacob against venturing into its depths, especially after nightfall.
The forest she doesn't like to be disturbed, especially at night. That's when they come out. Jacob, best not to speak of them.
Jacob, however, was undeterred. The warnings only served to pique his curiosity. He was a man of logic, a firm believer in the tangible. Yet there was something about the villagers' fear. It was so genuine, so deeply rooted. It planted a seed of doubt in his mind. As twilight descended, Jacob found himself drawn to the forest's edge. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. He ignored the villagers' warnings, their voices echoing in his mind like a distant, fading memory. They were just superstitious tales, he told himself, stories meant to scare children and keep them from wandering too far. He plunged into the woods, the dense canopy swallowing the last rays of the setting sun. The forest seemed to close in around him, its shadows growing longer and more menacing. The forest was alive in a way Jacob had never experienced before. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed to carry a hidden meaning. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a musty aroma that filled his lungs and made him feel both exhilarated and uneasy. Strange shadows danced at the edge of his vision, flickering in and out of existence like phantoms. The silence was broken only by the rustle of unseen creatures, their movements creating an almost rhythmic pattern that seemed to pulse with the heartbeat of the forest itself. "Jacob, just superstitious tales, right?" he whispered to himself, trying to steady his nerves. The deeper he ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the forest itself was watching him, judging his every move. The trees, gnarled and ancient, seemed to reach out towards him with twisted, grasping branches. Their bark was rough and cold to the touch, sending shivers down his spine. Their leaves, black as midnight, blotted out the faint moonlight, plunging him into an unnerving darkness. It was a darkness that seemed to have a life of its own, wrapping around him like a shroud. After what felt like hours of wandering through the dense, dark forest, Jacob stumbled upon a clearing bathed in eerie moonlight. The light seemed almost unnatural, casting long, twisted shadows that danced around him. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient altar, its surface etched with strange, indecipherable symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The air around the altar crackled with an unseen energy, a force that seemed to hum and vibrate, filling the clearing with an almost tangible presence. Jacob could feel it pulling at him, urging him closer, as if the very air was alive and beckoning him forward. He reached out to touch the cold stone, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings that seemed to glow faintly under his touch. As he did, the symbols began to glow with an otherworldly light, illuminating the clearing with a ghostly radiance. A low hum vibrated through the air, growing louder and more intense with each passing second, resonating deep within Jacob's chest. "Jacob, what is this place?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing hum. Suddenly Jacob became aware of movement in the shadows around him. He was not alone. Shapes flitted just beyond the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the dim light. He could hear the sound of heavy breathing, feel hot, rancid breaths on his neck, sending shivers down his spine. He knew, with a growing sense of dread, that he was being watched. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees whispering secrets he could not understand. Slowly, cautiously, Jacob turned to face the unseen presence. The shadows seemed to writhe and coalesce, taking on grotesque shapes. They were tall and skeletal, their bodies covered in matted fur.
Their eyes, they glowed with an unholy light.
Jacob found himself surrounded by a circle of these creatures. Their eyes, burning with malevolence, held him captive. He was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. He was trapped. A low growl rumbled from the throat of the creature directly in front of him. Its lips peeled back in a grotesque parody of a smile, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Jacob knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he was about to die. S4. The creatures began to chant in a language both ancient and evil. The ground beneath Jacob's feet vibrated with their power. The air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe.
They closed in on me, their claws reaching out, their touch like ice.
He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But instead of pain, he felt a searing heat. It spread through his body, burning away his humanity, twisting his insides. He opened his eyes to see the altar pulsating with energy. The symbols were etched onto his skin, burning like hot coals. The creatures were gone, vanished into the night. He was alone, but he was no longer human. S1. The transformation was agonizing. His bones cracked and reformed, his skin stretched and tore.
Roaring in pain.
He roared in pain as his teeth lengthened into fangs, his nails hardening into claws. His senses were heightened, the forest coming alive with a terrifying clarity. When the transformation was complete, Jacob was no longer the man who had entered the forest. He was something else, something monstrous,
Guttural growl.
He looked down at his hands, now covered in coarse fur, claws glinting in the moonlight. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a guttural growl. He was trapped in a nightmare, his mind screaming in terror, even as his body reveled in its newfound power. Driven by instinct, Jacob, or rather, the creature that had once been Jacob, made his way back to the village. He could smell the fear emanating from the houses, a feast for his newly awakened senses. He reached the edge of the village, his silhouette a terrifying spectacle against the rising sun. The villagers, who had once dismissed their legends as mere superstition, now cowered in fear. Their worst nightmares had become reality. The creature that was once Jacob stood at the edge of the forest, his head thrown back in a silent howl. The transformation was complete. He was one of them now, a guardian of the forest, forever bound to the shadows. S5, gasping in fear. At first, Jacob fought against the beast within him. He clung to the fading memories of his humanity, the life he once lived. But the forest was strong. It whispered to him in the rustling of leaves, the howl of the wind. It showed him visions of power and belonging.
Breathing heavily, stalking through the undergrowth.
He began to hunt, his instincts guiding him. He stalked through the undergrowth, his senses alert to every sound, every scent. He felt no remorse, no guilt, only a primal satisfaction in the thrill of the chase. He was no longer Jacob, the traveller, the seeker of the unknown. He was part of something ancient, something powerful. He was the guardian of the forest, the protector of its secrets.
Growling softly, standing protectively. Narrator, years passed. The villagers learned to fear the creature that roamed the forest. They spoke his name in hushed whispers, warning their children to never venture beyond the safety of the village. Jacob, the man, was long forgotten. In his place was a creature of myth and legend, a being of shadow and power.
He was the embodiment of the forest's wrath, the protector of its ancient magic. And so, Jacob, the seasoned traveller, the seeker of the unknown, found his final adventure. He became the very thing he had sought to understand, a creature of the night, forever bound to the shadows of the forest. He was the guardian, the protector, the monster of Morovia.